Fantasy football and you, navigating the crossroads of imagination and sport. So, you've joined a fantasy football league. Between cursory Google searches and overhearing your coworkers at the water cooler, you are confused and possibly even a little upset to hear terms like points per reception and flex player being thrown around as casually as bocce balls at a midsummer Floridian lawn party. Well, fear not. All of us, from multi-league veteran armchair quarterbacks to rookie first-timers, can benefit from a refresher. Let's start at the beginning. The National Football League was established in 1920, then known as the American Professional Football Association. A group of entrepreneurs met at a Hupmobile auto dealership in Canton, Ohio, with the bold idea of unifying 10 teams across 4 states into one common professional league. Sorry, we don't have time for all that. Let's skip ahead a century. The modern NFL is many things, and not all of them good. Hardcore NFL fans are often the first to offer valid critiques of some of the league's more problematic decisions. No, not those weirdos. We don't know them. Theses have been written on the positive effects of NFL football, and furthermore on the ability for sports as a whole to empower, embolden, and enlighten both youths and grown-ups alike. And therein lies the logic of fantasy football. Let's take a closer look at the term. On the surface, we're left gobsmacked at the oxymoronic pairing of the two terms. The term fantasy, after all, comes to late Middle English from Old French via Latin by way of the Greek verb phantasien, meaning to make visible. Fantasy is the faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. Football, on the other hand, is a not-so-subtle compound word formed from the Proto-Indo-European to Proto-Germanic to Old English furt, and the Old English via Old Norse burler. Football is an admittedly less elegant word, so you may be wondering how these two terms have collided to form a billion-dollar industry. The answer is, in fact, quite simple. Oh, whoops. Sorry, that's not right. Sorry, that's shouldn't be there. That's for a confidence seminar I'm giving at a middle school next week. Just a moment. There we go. You are not a great athlete. It's a reality that most of us are forced to accept at one point or another. The encroaching nihilistic cynicism of old age drives us to fantasy. In other words, fantasy football is cosplay. Now that we've established the why, it's time we discuss the what and the how. The NFL consists of 32 teams. 30? What? That's so many. A what? No, I don't know what an Arizona Cardinal is. The who? Oh, okay, yeah. North Carolina Panthers, that makes sense. Oh, really? Huh? A singular non-denominational Carolina? Yes, 32 teams divided into 2 conferences, each divided into 4 divisions. Teams play other teams, they win, lose, or tie, yada yada yada. Do a real good job, and you get a shiny metal football lollipop. Now, that summary will suffice for our purposes at this point, because we don't need to know what a Tampa Bay Buccaneer is right now. In fantasy football, you are the team. Give yourself a name, a logo, make t-shirts, custom order a big anvil you can hit with a hammer to hype yourself up, go off, go nuts. Have some team pride because this is it. You are it. Well, actually you're not it because you don't play football. You play fantasy football. So you're going to need some non-fantasy, real-life football players to help you construct your fantasy. Now, all participants in your fantasy football league have their team, and all teams are composed of different NFL players across the league. You could have players from only one team or have no two players from the same team on your roster. The possibilities are endless. But let's take a moment to look at how a team's fantasy roster is organized. First, you have your quarterback, the leader of the offense. He's going to touch the ball every time that team's offense does their offensive thing. In real football, the quarterback is the most important player on a team, and in fact, there is an argument to be made that among all major sports, there is no single position whose performance accounts for a greater contribution to overall success. Now, that being said, in fantasy terms, quarterbacks are slightly nerfed compared to many of the other positions further down on your roster. In most leagues, you have only one quarterback, and due to the fantasy scoring system, a quarterback's production less aggressively translates to points for your fantasy team. Next, you have two running back slots. Running backs have a short lifespan in the NFL. Their position is a brutal one. All NFL players incur a significant statistical risk for devastating injury every time they take the field, but of all fantasy positions, running back is likely the riskiest. But boom or bust, because your fantasy team stands to gain a lot of points from the two running backs you have. The best modern running backs are a threat not only to steamroll style run the ball effectively, but also to catch the ball and break ankles in the open field. Now, pass catching backs will be relevant for us when we examine PPR later on. Overall, top-tier running backs are a big commodity in fantasy football. They can produce in multiple ways and are perhaps less likely to disappear from the stat sheet than other positions, perhaps. Next, you have two wide receiver position. Receivers are always a threat to go off for big plays, which translates to big points for your team, but they can also be more inconsistent than a versatile running back. Now we have the tight end position. Tight ends are hybrid players who spend a lot of time doing the unglamorous job of blocking for teammates. Blocking is a highly technical wedging of oneself between a ball-carrying teammate and an opposing defender dead set on tackling said teammate. It is a respectable and selfless endeavor that sadly does not directly translate to any fantasy football value whatsoever. Honorary shout out here to linemen, the world's greatest athletes who will not be occupying space on your fantasy lineup. But back to tight ends. Despite the historic necessity of tight ends in an offensive blocking scheme, the modern NFL has some certified studs at this position. The right tight end can be a top 5 pass-catching option for any given team. Then there's the flex position, which incidentally is also the name of a business opportunity I have in the works. Think like hybrid cycling gym and juice bar. Hit me up if you want to come to my investors luncheon. I'll have a date for that as soon as Jamba Juice returns my calls and Netflix drops their copyright lawsuit. Anyway, the flex position spot on your roster can be filled with a running back, wide receiver, or tight end, but not a quarterback. As the weeks wear on and the season progresses, your lineup will require tinkering, experimenting, risk-taking, and so it benefits all of us both on our yoga mats and in our fantasy football endeavors to observe some flexibility. The final two roster spots are D/ST and kicker. The D stands for defense, and it should be noted that fantasy football, like many sports and sport-related activities, is biased towards offensive play, the guys who score the points, and not so much those other guys that try and stop the exciting point-scoring plays from ever happening. D/ST on your roster is like an honorable mention. Yeah, we know defense represents half of the entire game, but you only get one spot. Sorry, not sorry. An NFL team's defensive performance in terms of points allowed and turnovers or ball theft is translated into points for your fantasy team. ST stands for special teams, which refers to a team's kicking units. These are units of players for a team that take the field for kickoffs and punts, which occur after scoring plays and to concede possession with better field position. The kicker kicks the ball. 1 point for a made kick after a touchdown, 3 points for a field goal made in lieu of a touchdown. Yay! Good for you, kickers, the true physical specimen of the NFL. Your fantasy roster will also have a number of extra spots for you to hold on to players whose weekly point totals will not contribute to your weekly score, but are nonetheless important for reasons discussed later. These are your bench players, so named as an homage for the benches on which they are frequently observed to be sitting, and not for bench cookies, whose name sounds identical for Midwestern regional North American accent pen phonetic merging English speakers like myself. Let's talk scoring. IRL football has a few possible scoring plays. Let's focus on the two most common, the touchdown and the field goal. Football is fundamentally simple and philosophically complex. When you have the ball, take it, move it, matriculate it down the field to the opposing team's end zone. Have the audacity to move the ball all the way into their home base, and the game rewards you with 6 points. After a team scores, they are given the chance to earn extra points. Kick the ball from 33 yards out, and you convert an extra point. This play is referred to as an extra point. You also have the choice to run another play from 2 yards out, one single play to go back into the opposing team's end zone, home base, free zone, nana boo boo, stick your head in doo doo zone. And if you do, then you earn 2 points. We'll call this a 2-point play. In fantasy football, any player that runs the ball into the end zone or catches the ball in the end zone will earn exactly 6 points. Quarterbacks who are responsible for completing passes that result in a touchdown are awarded 4 points. Kickers who are successful at completing an extra point attempt will earn their fantasy owners an extra point. If a 2-point play is converted after a touchdown on a running play, then the scoring player will earn their fantasy team 2 points. A 2-point conversion earned by way of a passing play will earn both the passer and the receiver 2 points. Field goals are worth 3 points, and successful field goals will likewise earn a fantasy player 3 points for the fantasy team they are on. That is, unless the field goal is made from further than 39 yards away, in which case the fantasy owner of the kicker in question earns 4 points. But why would a team settle for 3 points and not 6 plus 1 points? That is the juxtaposition of football's fundamental simplicity and philosophical complexity. The game makes moving the ball towards the opposing end zone difficult in 2 ways. 1, by putting some of the scariest human beings on earth in front of the offense, who, to be fair, are also comprised of some bad, like Michael Jackson, in a good way, bad dudes, and also some like actual bad dudes. And two, by dividing the field into 10-yard increments and tracking a team's progress as a function of 10 yards. You have 4 chances, 4 plays to advance the ball at least 10 yards. If you run 4 plays and don't get 10 yards, then you give the ball to the other team. But screw that. I hate those guys. I'm not just going to give them the ball. If I run 3 plays and don't get my 10 yards, then I'm going to take the 4th play as an opportunity to kick the shit out of the ball so that when those losers do finally get it, they are as far away from my end zone as possible. That's a punt. But if I run 3 plays, don't get 10 yards, but I'm pretty darn close to the opposing team's end zone, then I can choose to kick a field goal, because an increased chance of a successful field goal is deemed more valuable than the cost risk of turning the ball over versus maybe possibly getting those coveted 6+1 points. The big picture for fantasy scoring is that the actual scoring plays for an NFL game translate pretty neatly onto the scoring of your fantasy team. But there's more. Points. Points. We love points. Let's add some more points. God, I love points. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and by extension, flex players all receive points for advancing the ball down the field and toward the opponent's goal line. For non-quarterback players, these points are related to yardage in the following way. 1 yard equals 1/10 of a point, so that magic number 10 yards nets you the equivalent value of the universe's lowest whole prime number. Wait, is one prime? It's divisible by itself. But if you divide 1 by 1 and you get 1, did you even do anything? Sorry, 1. You get 1 point if your fantasy player earns 10 yards. For quarterbacks, these yards gained points are calculated at a slightly diminished rate to keep things relatively equal, since quarterbacks account for more yardage. Quarterbacks earn 1 fantasy point for every 25 passing yards. Circling back to PPR, this mysterious initialism stands for points per reception. Now, this is a contentious topic, as some leagues observe PPR to varying degrees while others do not. The idea for PPR is to award players points for each successful catch or reception they make. On the 2 ends of this extreme, this can mean a player earns you fantasy points for a play that otherwise has little to no value in the actual game. They catch the ball, but don't gain any yardage. Nonetheless, your fantasy team earns points. Conversely, a long pass reception, on its own already worth significant points, is awarded additional points because the yardage gained resulted after a reception was made. There you go. Not such a scary term after all. For a full breakdown on scoring, including defense and special teams specifics, pause the video here. So, we've got roster spots and scoring covered. Next, let's discuss what your fantasy experience requires of you week in and week out. As has been said, injuries are an accepted reality of the game. Any football fan worth their salt is cheering for the greatest collection of athletes to stay healthy. That's just like general human empathy. But injuries will also have an impact on your fantasy lineup. If one of your fantasy players sustains an injury or is otherwise unable to compete in their weekly game, then you will need to change your roster accordingly. This is why your bench players are important. They are just sitting there, waiting for you to call their name, just waiting to come in and save the day for you at the 11th hour. Injuries can happen to any player, So it benefits you to diversify the positions of your chosen bench players in a manner that reflects the comparative likelihood of injuries by position. In other words, yes, you can have a bench full of kickers, but why would you do that? Why? It sounds like you just really like soccer. Maybe you should play fantasy soccer. I'm sure that's a thing, but I can't help you with that. Honestly, just good luck with that. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye, I guess. The football fans are gone, so let's talk about another important factor with substitutions. Over the course of the NFL season, all teams are granted 1 week wherein they don't play a game. This is the bye week, as in, bye Felicia, see you in 1 week, no games for you this Sunday. For fantasy purposes, this means that all players on your roster will disappear once during the season. A player can be a crucial part of your success week by week. They can go without injury for the entire season, but nonetheless, they will be unusable for you during their bye week. Plan accordingly, because your fantasy app will not do you the solid of taking the liberty of subbing out your injured or bye week player. You do not want to trot out a fantasy team with a position missing from your roster. You don't want to leave points on the table. Now, all of this is important to have a handle on during the week because you will not be able to make roster substitutions willy-nilly whenever you like. Your roster must be finalized before the first game begins for any given week. That means Thursday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, because the NFL thinks Thursday night football is culturally important enough to sacrifice player safety so that I stay up too late and am a general grumpy McGrumpface on Friday. Who are we kidding? It's money. It's always money. In 10 years, we'll all be watching football on Thursday night during our Disney Plus Amazon Coca-Cola Corporation condoned leisure time while we order carbon neutral Elon Musk brand nutritional squares with our blockchain Capital One non-fungible tokens. But until then, Thursday represents our weekly deadline. Once the first kickoff is kicked on Thursday night, your roster is locked in place until the final whistle blows on Monday night after we've all trudged home from our Kafka-esque humdrum 9-to-5s. Lastly, we need to address how you will acquire your dream roster for the 2021 NFL fantasy season. Your league will have a draft. Think Vietnam, but the imperialism is more subtle. Most leagues have a snake draft. You take turns choosing players in a randomly generated order. It's a snake because the fantasy participant that chooses last in your order gets to choose first in the second round, and then you proceed in reverse order from the previous round. Snake. Fortunately for you, there exists a plethora of data and analysis of fantasy player value. Seriously, it's actually kind of gross how much sports media exclusively discusses football in fantasy terms. Per CBS Sports, the top 12 highest valued fantasy players for the upcoming year include 9 running backs, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and 1 quarterback. The information is out there, so feel free to put as much or as little thought into your draft selections as you see fit. It is meant to be fun after all, so if your fantasies don't already involve data, spreadsheets, and statistical analyses, then don't sweat it. Fantasy apps are pretty user-friendly. They offer tips on everything from who you should pick next in the draft to which players are projected to score more in any given week. Again, fun. It's meant to be fun. Like any hobby, there are those who like to gatekeep, those whose idea of fun comes at the expense of others. But we don't like them. They suck. Go away, you jerks. We are here to have fun. If you're new to football, just keep in mind there's something to all of this. There's a reason grown adults paint themselves the corresponding color of their home team. No, you don't need to go out and buy body paint. You absolutely can, but you don't have to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But you're in a fantasy league now. Make of that what you will. Enjoy it. I envy you. Good for you. Good luck. And goodbye for now.